I've had a bit of a history with Halot printers. I used to call them Halot printers, and I don't think that's wrong. Anyway, previously I've reviewed the Mage Pro and the Mage S, which are working machines for sure, and they've got some cool unique features, but they're just objectively limited when compared to their often less expensive counterparts. But this Halot is not made by Creality, it's made by Pio Create, and this one has even more unique features than I've ever looked at before. So I guess the question I want to answer today is, can a Halot by any other name smell as sweet, or I guess printer's crap? Hi, I'm Ross, and this is Fohammer Videos. So the quick statement up front is that the founder of Pio Create, which I agree with you is a silly name, but this is how I was told to pronounce it, you know, nothing like how it's spelled, the founder was one of the co-founders of Creality, and they're now separating into this new brand, but what I don't know is whether Creality plan to make a different line of resin printers going forward. Honestly, I think they should stick to FTM. But for now, the Halot range of printers will come from what we should all see as a whole new company, I've been told, Pio Create. Now, if anyone has seen this printer already, you may be aware of the main thing that makes it stand out. Instead of the build plate raising and lowering for each layer of the print, you instead get the resin-filled vat and UV light system performing this activity. What does that give us in terms of tangible benefit? Well, we'll come to that. First off, I want to marvel at the size of this thing. It's only 344 by 331 by 434 millimeters, which is pretty impressive considering it's got a comparable print volume to many of its 16K competitors. And by the way, that volume is 211 by 118 by 200 millimeters. Now, whilst the marketing material will claim this is a 10.1 inch LCD, just like the other 16K machines I've tested, it's actually only got a diameter of 9.6 inches, and a few brands have tried to push this as a 10K screen. Newsflash brands, it isn't. This may work for TV buyers because you're including, I don't know, the size of the bezel around the LCD, but on LCDs, don't give us this crap saying it's a 10-inch screen when what we really need is the diameter of the printable area. But yeah, they're saying this is 10.1 inch when the printable area is only 9.6. And I know and may even be married to some people who would complain about that difference. But I have to say, I do like how cute and compact this machine is. It has an up and over lid, but unlike others, this can't be held at any position other than open or closed. To be fair though, not that I know of any reason you'd ever want to open a printer halfway, but it's a difference I wanted to point out. When it comes to ports, your main USB drive port is on top of the machine, which is the first time I've seen it here on a resin printer, and I've got to say this is quite handy. It keeps it accessible whilst keeping it out of the way of potential resin drips. Next to this is a Type B USB port, and while I've still got no idea what this is for, I'd infer it's to connect the printer to a computer like on a 2D printer in lieu of an Ethernet port, which this printer doesn't have, but it does have built-in Wi-Fi. On the back of the printer you've got two large fan outlets along with a power cable and rocker switch at the bottom, and there is no dedicated outlet for air extraction, something I actually loved from the Mage Pro and the Mage S. At the top on the rear is a USB-C port and resin pump inlet port, which are both for the heated pump accessory I'll come onto after we look at the main features, as this is an optional add-on which I'll be honest you probably won't even consider buying even if you do like the rest of the printer. You'll see, but if you can guess why already, pause the video and pop it in the comments. The final thing on externals is that the printer has little rubber pads for feet, which are fine, they're just not adjustable, though in fairness a level resin printer is only useful to stop the resin pooling to one corner of the vat when it gets too low. So long as your build plate and screen are parallel, that's all that should matter, which is something important about this machine because this is another one that purports to be true leveling free. So let's break down what potentially makes it that way. The first part of the mechanism is the build plate, which I have to say is interesting in a couple of ways. First up, it's got this twist release mechanism. Just twist the handles on both sides and these 15 grooves in the plate will move in to detach stuck resin, and when you twist it the other way, those parts will move out to push models from the affixed part of the plate. And this works really well, except when it doesn't. Now, it's great on larger models, but there are some downsides. First off, smaller parts could not detach, or in my case, some of them cracked on the base. And when you do need to scrape parts off, it can be a little trickier, but just a little. And also, for those of you wanting smooth parts from the build plate, you can't get that here. You'll actually be left with grooves on the prints where the resin will have cured in the gaps on these plates, and it's a pain in the arse to clean. You can, as I did, leave the plate in place attached to the printer when you loosen models, and some of them resin will drop, but I always use these silicone mats over the vats to catch them. You do get a plastic bib with this printer, but it doesn't cover the whole vat, it's flimsy, and it falls off pretty easily. Nevertheless, this is still a pretty decent release mechanism for a resin printer, one of the best I've seen. The best release mechanism I've seen on a printer is on the Formlabs Form 4, but I actually learned through my comment section on that video review that that type of release mechanism is actually patented, which is why nobody else can have it. So we get things like this instead. The other cool thing about this plate is how it attaches to the printer. Now, we've seen large bolts, we prefer clip-on build plates. Well, this has neither. It actually has nothing. The plate just slides into the metal gantry at the top of the printer, and when the print starts and the bed raises, it'll be mechanically held in place by two large clips on either side. Going down the printer arm, you've got two large lead screws, and they're for moving the plate and lighting system up and down. Now, moving on to the vat, unlike the previous Halot printers, they've actually ditched ACF film for a clear film that I suspect is PFA. I was told the final version of the vat will actually be black. This is just a prototype that's bare metal. Now, one thing I noticed is that unlike other machines, there are no standoff screws on the bottom of the vat, so when you need to place it on another surface for maintenance, the film will actually sit flat on the surface, which isn't great. But I do need to point out that Pio Create nailed it when it comes to pour spouts, because this is genuinely one of the best I've ever seen. I'm sure you'll agree with me on that. And I really love how this attaches to the printer. No screws, no clips, but instead we've got two large levers which actually compress the vat into place. And having these large arms stick out has another benefit, because when they're open, it'll actually prevent you from closing the lid, and if the lid doesn't close, the printer won't let you start a print. I think this is great mechanical design, preventing some simple dumbass printing mistakes I know at least I've made before, and I'm willing to bet I'm not alone in that. Below the vat is the screen, but above this there's also a screen protector which actually covers the whole inner frame of the light mechanism to prevent spills from getting into the glass or any of that mechanism. And I did ask Pio Create what the process for replacing LCDs was, because, well, I know that's an important consideration, but they've told me they're still working on it. But since the whole LCD module and LED array in this is a very small unit, I'm going to presume it's going to be a lot easier than a full teardown we've seen on other machines. If I get any updates on this, along with some other things I'll come on to, I'll add it to the video description. Now, the LCD itself is this new 16K LCD that all the brands are now using, which has a resolution of 15,120 by 6,230 pixels. So those pixels are rectangular and it's not really 16K. But for reference, this means the pixel size is 14 by 19 microns. As such, the printer has an AVC of 19 microns. So it's unfortunate that this doesn't mean we actually get the same quality prints from this as we would from other printers, and I suspect that that is partially due to the light system, but I'll come on to the other reason later. You see, where most printers have now moved on to cob light sources or chip-on-board light sources for sharpness, here, in order to make this vat platform the element that raises and falls, Pio Create simply didn't have the vertical space to put a cob system in here. So this has gone back to more of a matrix LED array, and you can actually see the individual UV light emitters through the screen when it's on. And what we know of classic LED arrays is that in comparison to cob light sources, they seem to be able to cause some blow on resin prints. But there's a couple of extra things to talk about before we fully conclude on that. So first up is this resin pump heater accessory, which I've got to say is thankfully optional. This plugs into the rear of the printer, both with a USB-C cable and a pump hose. This has a plate that folds down and an arm that folds up to hold your resin bottle, and the plate at the bottom actually has an RFID reader in it, which tells the printer what resin's installed, so long as you use Pio Create's bottles that have an RFID tag in the bottom. Also, it's worth knowing that the resin profiles are actually set and stored on the printer's operating system by default, which actually currently has limited options compared to the slicer settings, but you can, and I've had to, tell the printer to use the parameters from the printed file every time I've gone to print. Apparently they're changing the default to file, but anyway. The other feature of this pump is that when you connect Pio Create's resin bottles, which I didn't get, and this system doesn't work with other shaped bottles, is that you can actually pump resin from the bottle into a heating element inside the pump and then up into the printer, where it'll come out from a component which you actually unclip from the rear of the printer and clip onto two notches in the vat. Now, if you want to heat the resin that's in the vat, you actually need to manually pump it out and then back in over that heating element again. It's not automatically cycling the resin through a print. Now, unfortunately, this bit that clips on in the inside, I actually broke on the first attempt to use it, because Well, this is only a 3D printed prototype component, and I'm not going to hold them to task on this too much considering this is a sample part, and I've been assured that the final version will be vacuum formed plastic. But I've got to say, as far as pump and heating systems go, this one is especially awkward. I already don't like pump systems because lines of resin are a nightmare to clean when you're swapping between materials, but this takes what we saw on the Anycubic M7 Pro and adds a whole new level of cumbersome. Whilst this will pump warm resin into your printer, it won't keep it warm in cold environments, and well, isn't that the main point of a heater? Not all of us are printing in room temperature rooms. A lot of brands are adding heaters to printers without actually understanding the use case that most of us need them for, and it's when printing in places like garages and sheds, right? Now, moving on to the UI, I've got to say I do like the placement of the screen. It's certainly easier for me to access at raised arm height than at waist height, but I guess this benefit depends on how tall you are. I'm 5'9", which, well, that should let you make some accurate estimates. The UI is a little awkward though compared to most, but you'll get used to it. I've got to call out the unnecessary scrolling text marquees making an annoying comeback, especially when there's plenty of space now for 2 lines of text for a lot of these settings. And the other thing is, when you load a print, be it from Wi-Fi or USB, it'll actually automatically replace the single in-memory file that you're able to store on the printer, which will always be the file at the top left of the print menu. That's the one that you're going to print next, always. If you've got a different file there to what you expect, you're going to be printing the wrong thing. And then as for the slicer on the software side, they've now got Pio Create Halot box, which is separate from Creality's Halot box, or it might be taking over it. Again, I still don't fully understand the transition of this to a new company thing. Anyway, this is just a little less feature rich than other slicers like Lychee and Chitu box, but it's got a nice workflow. Arrange your parts, select or edit resin settings, add support, slice, and send to a USB drive or to the printer via Wi-Fi. And when we import models, it also lets us actually see the light zones will come on when you start a print. One of the other cool features of this machine and this LED array is that only the areas below the print that you're running should come on during the print. So if you're printing fewer models or one small model, there are fewer lights on, which PioCreat attributes to making the LCD last longer. Though I've got to be honest, I'm taking this claim with a pinch of salt because most prints will drop to the center of the plate on import anyway, and the jury's still out as to whether LCD life is more often reduced due to heat or UV penetration in a specific area. If it's heat alone, then yeah, this claim might have merit. If it's UV penetration, then it doesn't matter. You're just going to be burning the middle of the LCD more often than anywhere else, just like every other printer, unless you can remember where you've done all your previous prints on the plate and try to spread them out evenly. Now, I did try testing Chitu box, but at the time of testing, only the Pro version is currently compatible, and some of the options in the printer settings were completely ignored by the printer, such as print speed. Now, speaking of, once again, this is another Halot machine that doesn't have two-stage motion control or TSMC, but PioCreat have said that there is a level of acceleration applied. They just couldn't give me specifics on how this works. In fact, the exact quote is, "We continuously optimize printer configurations based on the resin and printing conditions, so unfortunately we are currently unable to provide exact motion parameters." My worry here is like it was with the previous Halot machines. Let's say you want to lift for 8mm, which is about right for a 10-inch printer with its release film in decent condition. If you've got a more brittle resin, you want to lift slower, and you can either lift for that whole 8mm painfully slow or print failingly fast. And if PioCreat's acceleration values aren't compatible with the speed your resin needs, your only option is to slow down even more. So it'd be kind of important to know at what point in that 8mm does it start to speed up, and how fast does it speed up, and what is the max speed it goes to. We can't just guess this stuff anymore. When we've spent years learning how other machines work, that's pretty ingrained knowledge. If PioCreat are going to do something different, then in order to be on par with the other competitors, they need to educate us as to how these things work. And finally, print quality. And this shows what I mentioned earlier. First of all, I actually printed 4 of the exact same exposure tests despite changing the slicer settings, because I didn't realize at first that every print would default to printer parameters rather than those in the file that I sliced. But even after figuring this out and running multiple tests, it was clear that the prints were bloated. I even dropped it down to half a second per 30 micron layers and still noticed signs of overexposure. And when printing models at these low exposure times, I was noticing failures, such as the leg from this model of Puck by Table Flip Foundry. Now, from the same people, I was able to get my cones of calibration dialed in, but this was still too overexposed for the sword to fit through the skull or the beer to fit in the mug, which is something I've managed to do on all other 16K printers. So it's not great, but on the plus side, at least anti-aliasing worked. Now, as I said earlier, I think some of this is likely due to the light source moving back to an LED array from chip on board, and it kind of renders the 16K screen here a bit redundant, but as we learned from Concepts 3D when we did an interview with them, these 16K screens are pretty much all that's available in this size of display right now. But brands have no choice but to use these, even though they're smaller and don't allow for as much UV penetration as the 12K or 8K screens we've had before, even though we can't actually see a quality improvement. But the other issue I think might be plaguing this printer is that the UV output of these is way too high. When I measured the output on the screen, I got readings of 5.9 to 6.9 milliwatts per centimeter squared across the screen, where most other printers I've tested are only 3 to 4 milliwatts. And I can't adjust UV intensity on this printer to see if that's what's causing most of the blow. It's something that PioCreat have said they will consider adding control for, but I've got no definitive answer as to whether that'll be adjustable on final machines. And I think it kind of needs to be, guys. This is incredibly powerful. Too powerful in my extensive but uneducated experience. So once again, I've got to say, I will update the description here if anything changes, and I hope it does. Again, it needs to in order to see if reducing the light intensity will actually improve the print quality like it did on my Saturn IV Ultra 16K. But even with that, I am still cautious of the LED array we have here. I just don't think this can be capable of being as sharp as other 16K machines that have COB. Though at the same time, I expect this will easily still be good enough for some larger models. I think it's just disappointing to see a 19 micron screen more comparable to a 35 or 50 micron screen than its peers. So, conclusion time. There is a lot I like about the new Halot. I think there are more individual things I like than individual things I dislike. When it comes to leveling free, well, I can only say not only did I not have to level this printer, but when printing a tall torture test, there were no signs of any wobbling. But I honestly don't know how much of this is because of the raising vat mechanism and how much is just because the frame for this mechanism here is incredibly solid when compared to other machines. Like, I'm sure this would work just as well the other way round. Now, if you're an actual engineer who can explain why it can't, or validate my assumptions as right, comment section please. For me, I can only go off what I've known from before, and I'm mostly still nervous about the term leveling free when remembering the Anycubic M5S, which first released with no way of leveling adjustment, and that worked fine for people who got one that was dead on, but for those who didn't, they were stuck with no method of necessary adjustment until the brand made a redesigned adjustable plate, which was just like all of the previous plates. And I am worried about something like that happening here. But as I said, I do think they've pushed the technology forward. I love a lot of the changes. I love the size of the unit. I love the levers. I like but don't love the USB port and screen placement. I like the part removal mechanism of the build plate and that it mounts with no bolts or latch. And I love how sturdy the whole thing is for how small and cute it is. But it is a hard one to directly recommend and champion as I presently have it, because the print quality is just not as sharp as other 16K machines, or even some 8K machines from a couple of years ago. So it has a few software updates and changes to make in my opinion, just to even have a chance of being on par, and whilst it's early days, the Halot series has not been one that historically improved software in the long term or life cycle of those machines. But unlike previous times I've communicated with the Halot team, previously via Creality, this time they've been far more engaging and receptive to feedback. So I hope that at least is a sign of more improvements to come this time round. So there you go, that's the printer as I see it. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you want to pick one of these up, I have affiliate links down in the description. And just like Hey Gears and Nova 3D, I'll make a 10% commission on these at no cost to you. And as some commenters seem to think, sure, this video, like all my videos, are designed to force you into buying these higher commission printers, even though they're the right ones for you. It's all cleverly designed by me, an idiot, to manipulate you so I can make more money. These aren't my honest opinions at all. And if you don't know that's obviously sarcasm, well, you clearly skipped through the video, so I'd kindly invite you to go back and watch it. For everyone else, I want to say thanks for watching, and until next time, please consider joining our members who are on screen now. They get their name in lights, exclusive videos, and early access. So until next time, party on, Wayne. Did you say it? Fohammer out.